ที่น่ากลัวน่ากลัว
There is a bus stop at Mount Vernon that I'm told is haunted. For non-Singapore residents, Mount Vernon is a road between two cemeteries, a Christian one on one side and a Muslim one on the other. Why do I say it's haunted? Well, I've been in many taxis, and when the drivers are talkative, they will most likely tell you this story when you ask them about ghostly encounters. They say, if you travel through Mount Vernon Road between midnight and 4 a.m., if you are lucky, you will see a beautiful young Malay mother with a baby in her arms. One time, there was an ignorant taxi driver who happened to pick her up. She boarded the taxi and just pointed ahead without saying a word. So the driver drove on ahead. After some minutes, he asked her where she wanted to go, but she just smiled and instructed him with a hand gesture to go straight ahead. Mount Vernon is a long-stretched road, and as the taxi approached the end of it at the junction, he asked her again where exactly she wanted to go. She simply replied, "Bila rumah," going home. He was a little annoyed by her ambiguous reply and made his impatience felt with his next remark. He complained, "Yes, I know you want to go home, but where the heck is your home? Gosh, you're giving me a hard time." She was hurt and started sobbing. Feeling guilty, he apologized and then asked her again, nicely this time, what her address was. She then asked to be taken back to the place she boarded his taxi. The irate driver was furious and made an angry, sharp U-turn and headed the other way back to the spot he picked her up from. Too busy nagging, he failed to realize that she was no longer seated in the back seat. When he did look in the mirror, he was horrified by her non-presence. Then, he smelt a sweet-smelling scent of frangipani flowers. This flower is associated with death. He was chilled to the bones with fear and sped off out of Mount Vernon Road all the way home. Other taxi drivers have also picked up the mother with a child, but had different experiences with her. Some would realize immediately after she came aboard that she was a ghost. Some would not even notice anything strange until they smelt the sweet scent. The taxi driver from the story never traveled along Mount Vernon Road after midnight, ever again, after that experience. My father is a butcher. He goes to the market early in the morning every day to prepare the pork for sale. As he doesn't ride a bike, he would walk all the way from our house in Mount Erskine to the market nearby. He often takes a shortcut through the cemetery, which would get him there in a shorter time. All the while, nothing unusual had ever happened, except on 2 occasions. Both incidents happened on the morning of Chinese New Year's Eve, while my father was walking alone through the cemetery. The first time was 3 years ago. It was still very early, probably around 5:30 a.m. when he left the house. The morning was exceptionally cold, as it had rained the night before. As my father was approaching the cemetery, he saw a pile of stones in front of him. From that pile of stones, he saw blazing lights, and soon a shadowy figure emerged and flew into the air. He just ignored what he saw and sped past the cemetery to get to work. Another incident occurred, exactly a year later. Although it was quite similar, this time the figure appeared clearer and hence scarier. As my father was walking along the same path that cuts through that cemetery, he saw a flash of lights ahead. The flash of lights came towards him, and went past my father. As it went past him, he saw a man moving along with it. However, the man had no legs. This incident happened not only once, but twice during my short visits to the memorial park. I didn't understand what got into me, that I kept wanting to visit the memorial. I guess it had been influenced by watching the movie Saving Private Ryan too much. The first time that I went to the memorial, from a distance, I saw a policeman waiting by the gates, and it was almost 6 p.m. We Muslims believed that was not a good time to visit cemeteries, but I went anyway. I went there alone, with only my ego and so-called bravery as my companions. I knew it was curiosity that got the best of me. However, as I entered the gates, there was not a single person to be found. The memorial was very quiet, and trust me, it is a very peaceful place. The gentle breeze blew across my face, and for a moment, I thought I liked it there. So I walked around and looked at each tombstone. Just knowing that they had died young made me shed a tear. Nothing happened, of course, and I really quite liked being alone. Then, it happened. As I was in the Muslim graveyard section, I swore there was a lady following me from behind. But she was nothing scary of that sort. From the corner of my eyes, she looked just like any other visitor to the memorial. I thought some people came, so I didn't react or say anything. But as I turned around to look at her, I realized there was no one there and that I was still very much alone. That was when I knew my stay was overdue and I had to leave. I started to feel very uneasy, so before I left, I decided to sit on one of the marble benches near the memorial slabs for a while. This time I could have sworn I felt an unearthly presence stood beside me, and my hair stood on its end. I started to feel a little edgy. Yet again, I would not move. It happened again. There was a loud thud sound coming from behind the memorial slab, like someone stepped on the metal sewage cover. The sound was so loud that I turned around to see what it was, but there was no one there. I thought it was probably the sound of the construction works nearby, but who was I kidding? There wasn't any construction works taking place, and this time, it happened much louder. Thud. That was when I was sure it came from behind me, and from inside the cemetery. My face turned white. All of a sudden there was a voice that kept telling me to leave that very instant, and so with only my 2 legs, I walked out as fast as I could, not even turning around to see who could have been behind me. When I had walked out the gate, I still felt fear as I prayed to God that I would walk out of there safely. As I almost reached the bus stop, I turned around for one last look, and to my disbelief, I saw a very tall Caucasian priest looking at me. He was so tall that he was almost as tall as the gate itself. He had blonde hair and was wearing a blue robe with yellow sash around his neck. Shocked, I looked again, and he was gone. There was neither the priest nor any man that I had seen loitering around that memorial park earlier. When I reached home, I was in such a state of shock that it took me days to recover. Built around 150 years ago, MacRitchie Reservoir is the oldest reservoir in Singapore. Before it was built, the area was a very scenic hill. And who can guess that there is an eerie tomb that most people shun away from nowadays, that was once a romantic alcove. It was a protruding lookout point in the middle of a hiking track along the slope of a hill. From there, the view was spectacular, as it overlooked a lush, hilly landscape, like a flowery meadow over the valley. Birds and wild monkeys over the hills sang in orchestra, and the nature sounds filled the air. The above-mentioned romantic alcove was a meeting place for Fan and Locke. Both are not real names. The alcove witnessed the most drastic emotions of mankind, put up by this couple through life and death, joy, romance, betrayal, grief, and tragedy. The story happened near the end of the 18th century. Fan was the sole daughter of a rich and famous family who ran an import trading business with the British. Fan grew up in Britain and always loved nature. Her environment growing up shaped her to be a bold and open-minded person. That was somewhat opposite to her father, who was very traditional and rigorous, a typical Chinese businessman who calculates gain and loss more than anything else. Since Fan was young, her family had arranged a marriage for her. That was common in the old days, with the son of a tycoon called Tai. Obviously, building a marriage with a tycoon's son would benefit lifting Fan's family business to a new height. However, Fan never wanted to submit to her fate. Being a girl of 20 years old, she was autonomous enough to manage her own life. She left home from time to time, and she would often like to hang out at the scenic walks in Macritchie Reservoir. That wasn't a reservoir in those days. That was a perfect place for some quiet moments, away from troubles. It became Fan's favorite sanctuary whenever she felt depressed. Fan met her Mr. Right at the reservoir one day. That was Locke. We don't know much about Locke, not even our informant. We were told that Locke was a charismatic communist, a leader of some political group before the war who regularly organized gatherings near the Macritchie Reservoir area. It was their destiny that they bumped into each other. They clicked and fell in love, though they came from quite a different background. Their dating at Macritchie Reservoir lasted for some period of time. This couple always met there, fell in love, and they vowed to get married there, with the witness of heaven and earth, the sky and the valley in Macritchie Reservoir. They courted each other more and more often, until one day, Fan's family caught wind of this. As expected, Fan's father was very angry about this affair because her daughter was disobeying him, let alone the fact that Locke was a communist clan leader, which was a natural enemy to a pro-British businessman. Fan's father and Tai's father plotted to do something to patch up the situation. The arranged marriage had to proceed in only a few months' time anyway. They wouldn't allow Locke to interrupt it. One fateful evening, as usual, Fan was expecting to meet Locke at their favorite spot in the now Macritchie Reservoir. Instead of Locke, his fellow came and delivered her a letter. Nobody knows what the content of the letter was and who had actually written it. However, on the next morning, Fan's body was found dead at the bottom of the valley, just right under the lookout point where Fan always hung out. Again, nobody knows whether she jumped down, was pushed down, or fell down by accident. After Fan's death, the wedding arranged between the two families of course had to be cancelled. Hence, Fan's family business, without the help of Tycoon Tai, plunged down very soon and eventually went bankrupt. But still, the Tycoon's son, Tai, loved Fan very much. That was what the public could see about him. He spent a lot of money and took Fan to be buried at the lookout point with a splendid tomb. The grand tomb had a superb facing, overseeing the hills across the valley. Many years later, however, Macritchie Reservoir was developed into a water catchment area, and the valley turned into a water reservoir, as it is today. Water filled the valley to the level of the tomb, flooding even the lower part of it. This is how the name Water Tomb came about. How do I know about this story? I know a friend who was a relative to Tai. He also said that Tai's family had done something to intervene into Fan's relationship with Locke, but not with any intent to have her killed. Most people would think that Tai so loved Fan, although it was only one-sided, that he had been so nice to build her a posh tomb. The truth was otherwise. Locke was actually murdered in the same year after Fan died, and Fan's body was found to be pregnant by the doctors in hospital. People know that Locke was killed in a riot, but it was actually a plot arranged on purpose. Here is the most intriguing thing. Locke's body was buried in Bukit Brown Cemetery, aka Copy Hill Cemetery. That was the idea by his dialect clan leader, who in turn was controlled by Tai's family, and Fan's body was offered to be buried at the lookout point that happened to be on the opposite side of the hill. In other words, Fan and Locke were buried between and separated by a hill, back to back, so that they never face each other. All these were arranged by Tai. You can see how jealousy turned into hatred and then into revenge. Since then, Fan's grave was nicknamed as Water Tomb. Even more frightening, people believe that it is very haunted. Sightings of a female apparition emerging from water are common at night. Some call it Shue Gui, water ghost. Nowadays, the descendants of Tai's family have realized what their grandfather had done is tremendously wrong. They feel guilty about it, especially after they heard that the Shue Gui, which is believed to be Fan's spirit, was haunting the reservoir. They used to invite monks to perform rituals trying to appease the spirit, but that didn't help. Until now, Tai's family has been funding a contractor to come and sweep the tomb regularly. Every year, they will bring offerings by themselves to the tomb during festivals like Qingming and July Hungry Ghost Month. This is a fair world, where planting a good deed you will receive a good reward. Likewise, a crime will invite mishap. God knows what they have done. Tai's family seems to be cursed. Their grandfather and the father were both drowned to death, though not in Makrichi Reservoir. It wasn't long ago. The father, at his late age, had developed some mental problem. He was kept at home all the time. But for some unknown reason, one day he sneaked away alone and was found drowned in a sewage drain mysteriously. It was classified as an unnatural death by the police and was reported on news several years ago. I'll share with you guys a secret. If you want to know whether Fan's spirit is around, just throw a coconut into the water. If it floats, that means no spirit. If it sinks, that shows Fan's spirit is around. Not sure if you guys experienced it, but I've had these corner of the eye sightings several times in my old house. I was staying in a 4-room flat in Hougang in the late 80s, which was built on the site of a cemetery, I heard. There are 2 abandoned cemeteries near Serangoon that side, which is very near to our neighborhood. The tombs are barely legible now, and the whole place is covered in brush and in grass. One time, I was sitting here at the computer, and I saw someone out of the corner of my eye open the door to the room, looking at me, then close the door again. Since I live alone with my dog, I was quite surprised. I got up quick and checked it out, but there was no one in the living room. If they are a thief, I would have heard them coming in, but there was no noise at all. When I was a little kid, I once saw a lady in cheongsam dress carrying a basket. She was sitting on a bench near the playground, knitting something. Actually, my sister was there with me and saw her too, and we were startled and looked at each other. I mean, that time was around 10 p.m. It was quite a spooky sight. Then, when we looked back over, she was gone, along with the bench. I know I didn't dream this up because I've spoken with my sister about it recently, and she remembers it just as vividly as I do. This was relayed to us by our English teacher, Mr. Duffin. It was raining and cold when I got out of work that evening. It would soon be dark. I had a long day at work, and I hated getting home in the dark, so I decided to take the shortcut, which cuts through a graveyard. I grew up in this little town, and I've heard my share of queer stories about that graveyard. However, I was a skeptic. I just didn't believe in ghosts. I brushed away all those stories, claiming that they were made up by some people to scare others. I pulled my hood on and started the walk home. The rain had ceased by then, but the path was still all muddy. I slowly made my way through the graveyard, thinking of nothing but to get home soon. As I made my way deeper and deeper into the graveyard, I heard a faint tapping sound. I couldn't make out which direction the sound came from, but it seemed to be all over me. I ignored it and kept on, not wanting to be late. Nevertheless, the tapping seemed to be gradually getting louder as I went on. This became quite annoying, for I thought maybe someone is trying to spook me, and I definitely wasn't in the mood that evening. The noise became louder still, and I am beginning to be able to sense where it is coming from. I decided I had to check it out. Slowly, I find my way through a little path. Then, right ahead of me, there was a white man crouching down in front of a grave. He was busy tapping away. Before I could open my mouth and ask what he was doing, he stopped and turned towards me. He didn't look anything unusual, even spooky. But there's one thing about his eyes that made the hair on the back of my head stand up. He looked straight at me and said,
They spelt my name wrong.
and then disappeared. This story happened before I was born, and it was told to me by my father, who was a taxi driver. It was around 9 p.m. My father was driving his taxi to meet my two uncles, who are also taxi drivers, at Rex, Saleji chicken rice stall, for dinner. While driving along the old Bukit Timah, near the railway station, his taxi was flagged down by a very beautiful slim Chinese lady. He stopped to ask her where her destination was. She told him it's Bidadari Cemetery at Aljunied Road. Looking at her again, and without any hesitation, he picked her up. On my dad's mind, it was only a passenger, and it's not very far back to where he was going. Once she was in the cab, my dad told me that his cab had a sudden increase in weight, and the perfume she had on was very strong. Even with all the windows down, the perfume was too strong for him. This was a time when taxis didn't have air conditioning. My dad kept on looking at her through his rearview mirror, and she too noticed my dad looking at her. She broke the silence and told my dad her reason to visit the place this hour. She told my dad that her husband is a heavy drinker and he loves gambling. He always joins his kaki gamblers, and without fail every night goes to the hut near the cemetery to gamble to avoid the police. My dad asked her, isn't she afraid of going there alone? And she replied, I go there alone but will come out with my husband, so I need not worry. She even told my dad about her financial problems and that she was working in the bar as a lounge hostess to settle her husband's gambling debts. While talking, she requested my father to wait for her to pick up her husband and fetch her back to Bukit Timah, where he had picked her up. My dad told her that he couldn't wait very long, as he has to meet his brother-in-laws for dinner. She told him that if he couldn't drop her at Bukit Timah, he could just drop them off at Serangoon Road so that they could hop into another taxi to get back. My father agreed, and finally they reached Bidadari Cemetery. Once there, she directed the way to the place. My dad had to have the high beams on, as the place was pitch black. After she got out of the taxi, the weight came back to normal with a jerk. Before leaving to pick up her husband, she told my dad to wait until she comes, as this place is not easy to get a taxi at this time. She also reminded him to leave the meter running, as it is unfair for my dad to close and open again. After dropping her off, my dad reversed the taxi to its moving position while waiting for the couple. Without realizing it, he just dozed off. Suddenly, there was a hard pat on his shoulder, and thinking that the couple were there, my dad opened his eyes. He saw the meter, and it showed more than $25. He looked at the side of his taxi door and around him, but he could not find anyone. He looked at the time, and it showed 11:45 p.m. My dad's body shivered, and he started his taxi up. He put on his high beam lights, and to his shock, his taxi is parked at the road facing the tombstones, Malay Cemetery. He looked at his rearview mirror, and the same lady he picked up was seen in his mirror, looking very straight and all in white. There was no movement, and she looked very stern. Out of fear, my dad just pressed the oil as hard as he could, and his next stop was home. Upon reaching home, he was sweating so much that it was like he was drenched in the heavy downpour. For more than 2 weeks, my dad was terribly sick, and my mum had to bring him to mediums, temples, and do prayers for him almost every day. The lady kept coming to my dad's dream, which made him lose his sleep. My father had no appetite and was falling sick. After consulting some Chinese and Malay mediums, my mum was told to pray to the soul and plead for her to leave my dad alone. My mum gave various kinds of offerings, and it took more than 2 months for my dad to come back to his normal self. After that incident, my dad, till his death about 9 years ago, would not drive a taxi at night at all. He only drives as early as 6 and finishes by 3 p.m. Checking at the Bidadari Muslim cemetery, my parents were told that there was this young Chinese homely woman who fell in love with a young Malay guy. He had no proper job, took drugs and sold drugs for a living. He was a heavy gambler and finally became a pimp. When he loved this Chinese girl, religion became the first barrier for both of them. Finally, she ran away from her home to live with him at the cemetery hut. That's where all her problems started. For money, he asked her to work as a bar hostess and finally prostitute. One day, when she realized that she was pregnant, she told him that it's time to settle down. He was not willing to accept the baby, saying that she was a prostitute and he didn't even know whose baby she was carrying. Crying and pleading didn't help her. He left the hut, and when he came back a couple of hours later, the poor lady had hanged herself at the hut, and since then people around the area, especially men, have been disturbed by her. Even at times, they can hear her crying. Why Bukit Timah? Because that's where her parents and siblings lived, at the atap houses next to the railway stations. I was on a school trip and was headed to Genting's First World Hotel. I was there for 5 days, and it all happened on the third night. So let's call my two friends Nina and Denise. During the evening, my two friends and I decided to go to the lobby and just do some window shopping. But we went to the local Singapore souvenir shop, and they took a liking to a few sunglasses there. I didn't buy any, but they both bought one pair each. We went back up to our rooms, respectively. I was rooming with Nina. Denise decided to come over to our room later that night, around 9 o'clock. Well, she brought her sunglasses along as well. The three of us were on the bed, with myself, Nina, and Denise, seated from left to right. I took Nina's sunglasses and started toying with them after she went to the toilet to take a shower. The lens of her sunglasses were facing me, and I tilted it to the right, where there was this open-air metal bar with a few hangers on it. Note, there were no clothes hanging there at the time. To my horror, there was this white figure hanging from the hangers. I could vividly see the shape of her tattered white gown and long, disheveled black hair, which was covering her face. Yes, a woman. I threw the glasses towards Denise, who was still on the bed with me. She got a fright and asked me what happened. I told her everything, and I remembered being so hysterical about it. She didn't believe me, of course, since nothing was on the hangers when seen with the naked eye. Trembling badly, I took the sunglasses again and tilted them slowly. It was gone. She laughed and told me to stop scaring her, but I was so badly shaken that I didn't dare to even get out of bed. Minutes later, Nina got out of the shower, and I told her what happened. She too laughed about it and told me it was probably the reflection. Note, the second time I tilted it, the ghost was gone. I felt so wronged. While Nina was blow-drying her hair, I turned to Denise and she looked really pale. She looked at me and told me I saw her too. I also noticed that her sunglasses were on the floor. I saw her against the curtains, Denise said. The curtains were brown and they were drawn. She started describing to me her features, and they matched with mine. We were both so badly shaken. Nina, however, still didn't believe us. That night, Denise went back to her room, leaving Nina and I alone. She was fast asleep by 10:30, but I was still wide awake, beside her, trembling. Despite being someone who loves anything horror, this was the first time I was actually trembling. The whole room felt really creepy and eerie. After that trip, and a few months later, Nina told me that her sunglasses cracked for no apparent reason. It was neither crushed nor thrown to the floor. I'm not sure if it was the room or the sunglasses, but this is one ghostly experience I'll never forget. Okay, well, here goes. This happened a long time ago, but I still remember. It's about an apartment at Bedok North, Block 541. A lot of scary things happened there. My grandpa died in 1997, so after his death, my grandma took my 2 aunts and 3 uncles and moved into an apartment, which was just upstairs. It had only 2 bedrooms, with a little cemented backyard in the back, even though it wasn't on the ground floor. My grandma, my 2 aunts, and my youngest uncle shared 1 bedroom, and my 2 older uncles shared the other. It was said that in the apartment my grandma moved into, a girl of about 5 to 7 years fell from one of the bedroom's windows. One day my aunt was in my grandma's room, playing Barbie. She played for a while, but then she decided to go outside to play with some of her friends. While she was on her way out, she saw that in my uncle's room, a boy was playing video games. She thought that it was probably my youngest uncle, so she ignored him and just walked into the living room. When she got to the living room, my youngest uncle was out there. She asked him if he was playing video games in the bedroom, but he said he wasn't. So she got scared. Another time when it was just my 3 uncles, 2 aunts and me home in the apartment. It was pretty late, so we decided to go to sleep, but then someone started knocking on the door. Nobody wanted to get it because it was so late already. Then the knocks got louder. My eldest uncle and I got mad, so both of us went to go check, but no one was there. Both of us went back and got ready to go to sleep, but it started again. This time it was louder. It was like that person was dead mad or something. My older uncle went back to check it, and again, no one was there. So we got mad and started cussing at it. After that, everyone tried to go to sleep, but this time the knock was at the back door, which was all glass. My 2 older uncles went to go check, but still, nothing, nor was anyone there. So everyone decided to go to sleep in my grandma's room, and my oldest uncle put a knife under his pillow. In my culture, to scare a ghost away, put a knife under your pillow, or hang a purple corn next to you. Another time, one of my grandma's aunts, around her age, came to visit her. It was pretty late, and everyone was sleeping except her, because she came from such a long way. She wanted to watch some movies that my grandma had, so it was only her awake. She decided to sleep outside in the cemented backyard. She told us that while she was watching a movie, she heard someone say,
"Sister-in-law, come on, let's go."
The voice kept on telling her to go. So she got mad. She knew that at the time no kids would still be playing around, so she yelled back in anger, "Go find your sister-in-law somewhere else. I am not your sister-in-law." Then she looked, and it was a cat. The next few days, the old man next door to my grandma died. Yeah, all of these are true. I'm still freaking out while I'm typing all of this. Even though this was a long time ago, I'm still scared. My youngest aunt, the one who saw the boy, was always seeing stuff, and she was always feeling crushed by someone while she was sleeping. It all started whilst my hubby and his business partner were scouting for a cafe unit because the previous unit in Temasek Tower had been torn down. They were indeed unlucky to find this unit in Changi Village. If I put it in bits and pieces, I realized it did not welcome us. First, when they were supposed to move into this unit in the afternoon, the movers broke down, called them that they can only make it in the evening. By the time they went to Temasek Tower to load and unload, it was already past midnight. Hence, the next morning my hubby went to Changi to do all the unpacking. After only being half a day there, a fire broke out near the pantry area. I did not join my husband till the 3rd month because my ex-boss was retrenched and returned to Germany. Since I love to bake, I supply the cafe desserts, homemade cakes and pastries. Nothing really much happened till the 6th month in this unit. First, I began to see flashes. Then, I told my hubby, and he was surprised because he experienced it several times but did not confide in me. I just had this gut feeling something was there. I can't see, but something told me it's there. The next day, I brought my digital camera. Didn't bother to review it and only saw it on our way back. It appeared as an orange orb on the tabletop. I realized My instinct was right. As days passed, I think it realized I spotted it. Here are some of the things that happened. Stray cats started to flock into our cafe entrances, looking as if something was jumping from one end to another. The mustard that my husband frequently used went missing. The service staff saw flashes like we do. Bees swarmed to our speakers on one afternoon. A roast chicken that was left on the counter in less than 20 minutes was infested with maggots. Water tap and radio were constantly turned on. Oh, this unit had been blessed by a Catholic priest when they first moved in. Because of this incident, we also consulted a Thai geomancer who told us that there was a little boy and an old man in this unit. We were told to get an old toy, something which is obsolete, the small drum that could be heard when you turn the beads. During our last leg here, we were terribly drained with many other freaky incidents and bad business that we decided to give the shop up. Although 2.5 years had passed, I had not given up my research. Recently, believe it or not, this psychic from Canada contacted me after looking at my photos. She told me, through the pictures, this unit was cursed. Something happened in the 60s. A massive fire started and killed many lives there. She seemed to be able to connect to some souls. It seemed they were trapped, unable to pass on. There was also this eerie photo which I took for my hubby as a memento, in which a blade-like object appeared. She conveyed that it was old blood, a male figure which will always be around. It makes me wonder now why none of its tenants, including ourselves, never stayed in this unit for more than a year. Many would have heard of Sunway College and Monash University's Malaysian campus. They are situated on a joint campus in Bandar Sunway, a suburb of Kuala Lumpur. The campus area consists of 2 blocks of main buildings, one each for Monash University and Sunway College. Also, in the campus is a 4-block apartment-style hostel complex. They are all relatively new buildings, but probably built on old land, or even ancient tribes' land. There weren't many stories about the main building. However, many sightings and eerie occurrences were reported within the hostel complex. Many years back, students of a particular apartment in Block A heard cries and evil laughter all over the apartment. Then, there was blood everywhere on the wall. The hostel management had to seal off that particular apartment and called in the mediums to cleanse the place. Over in Block C, students staying there often heard sounds of crying. At times, it was worse than just normal cries. The cries can be so high-pitched, it drives everyone crazy, not to mention petrified. Also, many reported to have heard babies' cries as well. Many students reckoned there was a mother crying for her lost baby. Almost every other apartment in the hostel is haunted. When I stayed there some years back, my hostel apartment mate, Luke, had a personal experience once. Luke stayed in the extension room, partitioned with sandboards. One night, Luke was half asleep when he felt someone pull his blanket away. At the same time, he heard a scratching sound on the sandboard wall beside him. He stayed still for a while, trying to figure out what it was. He called out to see if there was someone on the other side of the wall, but no one answered. Instead, the scratching stopped. He told us the story, but we all dismissed it by saying it was probably some insect or rats. On another occasion, he was sleeping soundly one night until he felt someone shaking his bed. He opened his eyes, looked around, and found nobody in his room. Nevertheless, his bed was still shaking, and soon there was the same scratching sound on the other side of the wall. He shouted at whatever it was to go away, and it disappeared after a while. These are common stories that are often told throughout the hostel. Nevertheless, there's one particular story that had everyone troubled. In a room on the 5th floor, facing the Monash University building, one girl, let's call her Yen, was looking out of her window one night. In the dark, she saw a figure standing on the rooftop of the building, which is right opposite of her. Yen took a careful look, and even though she couldn't make out how the person looked, she was certain there was someone standing up there. Yen was wondering what that person was up to. That person certainly didn't look like a construction worker or repairman. Yen stared at the figure for a few moments. Then, the figure jumped off the building. Yen got a great shock, and she gave out a soft scream. She looked around, but she couldn't be sure if that person had landed on the ground. She thought she just witnessed a suicide attempt, but she couldn't be sure. After all, it was a dark night. Yen looked up again and saw the figure still up there. She thought she might have been imagining things, but how could that be? She was confused, but she continued looking at the figure. Then, the figure jumped off the roof again. This time, Yen was certain that person did jump, and she was watching the figure falling from the roof until about halfway down when the figure just disappeared. Yen started feeling goosebumps. She looked around the ground area, but she couldn't find any sign of anything. Yen looked up again, and there it was, up on the rooftop again. After a short moment, the figure jumped off again and disappeared in mid-air. Yen turned away and ran out of her room into the next room. She was so scared, she just sat on her friend's bed without a word. Her friend was shocked to see her all pale and in a state of shock. Yen told her what happened after she calmed down. There was no report of any suicide or anyone falling off of the building that night or the next day. Some ex-students claimed there was a construction worker who fell to his death while the Monash University building was still under construction. One of my friends managed to secure a renovated colonial resort at Sentosa. It was one of those sort of corporate-owned mansions, actually. Humongous. Looks damn old on the outside, but the interior was top-notch. It had a very, very nice view. Out of the balcony you could see Siloso Beach. But other than that, the surrounding was very, very dark and deserted. It's near to the Sentosa holiday resorts, those with air shelters built in front of them. In fact, they were in the same area. I guess some of you guys who visited there should know what I mean by dark and spooky. So we few guys decided to stay for a full week ourselves. The adults left after the 4th day because they grew bored of mahjong and TV. And being the adventurous preteens we were, we decided to explore the surrounding area. There was this much larger and dilapidated mansion on top of a hill beside our place. I think back now and still whack myself for being so daring to enter that place. So we climbed the worn-out tarmac driveway that led to the house. As we climbed, one of our female friends, let's call her Carol for now, she kept insisting that we turned back because she's not feeling that good. So being the macho guys we are, we mocked her and insisted she come along. Stupid, I know. So we reached the house entrance. It was at least 2 times the size of our mansion, easily 3/4 of a football field. The windows and doors were bolted up with planks. Typical haunted house material, I know. But they were falling off due to the old age. Imagine how old that house must have been for some heavy wooden planks to disintegrate by a soft nudge. We made our way into the house. It smelt musty, like your long-forgotten closet. Other than that, the house was practically undisturbed compared to other popular haunted spots. No graffiti, no condoms, no candles and stuff. We explored the entire lobby. Yes, a lobby. That place was that big. We dared to climb the grand staircase in the middle. It looked like it was falling apart. Then I found this table with some objects lying on top right underneath the stairs. Some form of altar, except I didn't recognize any of the figurines on the altar. So I asked my friend to shine his torch in my direction. What I saw made me almost scream. Those figurines were porcelain toys, like those cutesy little girls. Then we started thinking, what the hell? This is getting wrong. What are those toys doing in a place like this? Then suddenly, Carol screamed. I'm still surprised that I didn't run once I heard that. Bewildered, we asked her what was wrong. She just closed her eyes and kept saying, I want to get out of here, I want to get out of here. Then this macho guy in my group asked her sternly what was wrong. She just shook her head frantically and just told us to get out. And so we did, no doubt puzzled more than scared. Then, back at the resort, we asked her what she saw. She said that when I asked my friend to shine the torch at the altar, she saw some pale, shadowy figure standing right behind the altar, looking at me and the other guy in front of the altar. And that figure was only a bit taller than the altar, so technically a kid ghost, I presume. Then she tried to look elsewhere cause she was too scared. She looked up on the second floor staircase. She then saw a few of those white figures, some big, some small, all looking down at us. That was when she screamed. Still manages to make me shiver after all those years. Anyways, that place we lived in is no longer there. But that mansion on the hill still is. It's been almost 12 years now since it happened, but the memory is still freshly etched in the minds of everyone that experienced it. There were 7 of us, fresh from the battle wounds of the 0 levels, so camping out at East Coast was part of our recuperating treatment. And soon, it became a regular outing, almost every weekend in December 1996. But one of those weekends changed our lives and perceptions of the paranormal forever. It started out as usual. We came early, set up camp near the chalet's tennis courts at around 12. There was a Malay family camping on our right, and on our left, a couple was camping with a bunch of their friends lingering around. Shah and his girlfriend, Herman, Yan, Wan, and me. We were there to set up the tent. Everything goes on as usual. We played soccer in a nearby field, and even had fun in the water swimming and thrashing around beside the water breaker, which is located, coincidentally, beside the campsite. Time always goes by fast when we are having a good time. So before we knew it, Shah and his girlfriend had to leave, and so did Wan. So when nighttime arrived, there was only Herman, Yan, and me. But we were more than happy when Mali and Alham came to join us for the night later in the evening. As I remembered, Mali had just knocked off from his part-time job at Metro and joined us immediately after work. By then Shah and Wan had already left. It was a hot evening, so the last place we wanted to be was in the tent. We were practically doing nothing except lazing around the premises of our campsite, and then the couple on our left was having a drinking session with their friends, while their radio was blasting inconsiderately. We were just talking and joking among ourselves, reminiscing on the rapidly vanishing memories of our secondary school life, thinking about the teachers and the pranks we pulled. It was past midnight. The mini party on our left had died. The couple had retired to their tent, drunk, and zipped the door all the way up despite the atrociously hot night. The Malay family on our right was trying hard to make their little baby stop crying. The little kid had been crying for quite some time despite attempts to pacify him. We thought it could have been due to the heat. Jan and me, just sitting on the mat that we placed outside the entrance of the tent while looking towards the sea with our feet stretched out. Herman, Mali and Alham were playing Uno. As we were looking out to the sea, we saw a black cat walking along the shore. The baby from the camp on our right is still crying, even louder than before, as if he was really trying to tell us something. Then, Jan laid back on the mat. Our tent was set up beside a tree, such that as we were lazing around on the mat, we are also sheltered under the branches of this huge tree. By then, everyone was lying on the mat, facing the sky, which is partially covered by the branches and leaves of the tree. Suddenly, for no reason, a young leaf fell and dropped on Jan's face. There was no breeze, no gust of wind or anything. The green leaf just dropped graciously on his face. From what I remembered, all of a sudden, Mali instructed us to go into the tent immediately. I still remember how stubborn Alham was being when we told him to go into the tent. He kept asking questions, and it's frustrating to have questions asked when you just can't find a way to explain. By then, everyone was in the tent, except Mali. Mali is special. He has this unique ability to see and communicate with things. And probably the reason why he told us to go into the tent was because of the reasons which are unexplainable by logic. By then, the situation in the tent was eerily unpleasant. Alham was asking these irritating questions. Herman was quiet and pale. Jan and me were praying hard in silence. We were just looking at Mali from inside the tent. By then, Mali had positioned himself right in front of the tent's door, with his back facing us, as if he was guarding the door from something. He was sitting like a typical bomo, a lighted cigarette in his right hand. He seemed to be in a trance as he bowed his head in silence. A low murmur emanated. Just then, Jan broke his silence. He said he saw something on the tree when the leaf fell on him. That statement kinda shut Alham up, as if he got the answer to everything, and then another awkward silence surfaced, coupled with the eerie murmur from Mali. By then everyone was in fear. Suddenly, Mali got up. He went round the tent several times and then came back and resumed his initial position. And he hadn't yet spoke another word to us ever since he told us to get into the tent. After a few minutes, which seemed like eternity, he finally returned and faced us. He said, the spirits residing in the vicinity of the campsite are angry, because it seems some of us have offended them in some way or another. He said he could see a head in the sea looking at us, and another white flying figure sitting on top of the tree beside our tent. The white figure wanted to enter our tent, but he sealed it off with some prayers around the four corners of the campsite, which kind of deter its intentions. The emerging head in the sea is angry with us because it seemed that 3 people had urinated near its residing place. And Mali asked us personally to own up. He wanted to know who among us is guilty of doing that. I raised my hand. So did Jan. We were both guilty of doing that when we were bathing in the sea earlier in the afternoon. The only one missing from the figure is Wan, who had left earlier, even before Mali arrived. He makes the third person guilty of the crime. The flying white figure perching in the tree beside our tent is angry because we have dirtied its residing place by hanging our undies to dry on the tree. It is also angry because it claimed that we have been drinking and engaging in dirty activities in its area. So Mali asked who among us have been guilty of some hanky-panky business before he came. None of us admitted, which is true. None of us did that. There's hardly any girls in the group to begin with for hanky-panky to start in the first place. Suddenly I realized that it might be referring to the camp on our left. It must have associated us with them since we are camping closely to each other. After I told him that, Mali turned with his back facing us again. He was engaging in another trance, and after some time, he turned back again. He said he had managed to appease the angry spirit from the sea. He said the emerging head from the sea had disappeared. The only one left is a white flying figure. It seems to be more stubborn, and it refuses to leave us alone. Mali told us that the white figure had flown off to a coconut tree near the water breaker, and he said that it had made itself visible. Mali wanted those who do not have a faint heart to peer out of the tent's door to look at it. Initially, we were hesitant and skeptical of our heart's ability to withstand the inevitably horrifying scene that will unfold if we decide to look at it. I've always been a skeptic, and so I took the plunge. I peered out first. I then followed Yan and the rest. What I saw made me a believer. On top of the coconut tree, right at the edge of its leaves, was a blurry white figure with no form. Static in its position despite the fact that the coconut tree is waving gently as the breeze is blowing. It stayed there, right on the edge of the coconut leaves. After that, I pulled myself back into the safety of the tent, and everyone sat in silence. We stayed in the tent till sunrise. We were awake all night, until the sun rose. That's when we were finally allowed to go out of the tent. By then, we were exhausted and sleepy, but very much relieved that we came out of it alive. Mali told us that the feud is not over, and though we were relieved, the story didn't end there. The thing followed Yan back home, and Mali had to stay with him for several days till the thing finally decided to leave him alone. I used to drive up to Malaysia quite often for short holidays. On one particular trip, I was driving to Penang along the NS highway late at night. As it was off-peak season, for most of the stretch, mine was the only car on the dark road. My wife was sleeping when we were approaching Ipoh. Out of nowhere, there was this terrible stench that seemed to envelop us, right in the car. It got so bad my wife woke up and asked me what that smell was. That smell, it was like some carcass or rotting meat. So pungent, so strong. At that point we sensed something was amiss. Then I remembered an uncle who had a similar experience. Stench in the car at night, and subsequently his car broke down right beside a cemetery. It was only after he opened the window the stench went away, and his car kick-started again. Ipoh Highway is quite infamous for their own tales, so I was hoping, not here please. So I told my wife to go back to sleep while I opened the window for a bit of ventilation, but the smell lingered. The whole time all I hoped was to make it to the toll area where there would be people and lights. And, thankfully, just as I approached the tolls, the smell dispersed. Just strange, inside the car with aircon on and window open, the stench can be so strong. Thankfully nothing happened for the rest of the night. I recounted the story to my uncle. He said a spirit might have hitched a ride, and the smell was due to the rotting corpse. Nothing sinister, but still scary thinking back. This happened in a public university in Malaysia, and I cannot remember which one. This story happened in a girls' hostel block. It happened many years ago, and the freshmen were having their orientation week. One girl was allocated in a double-sharing room but was living alone. She did not have a roommate. During the orientation week, the seniors warned them not to open the door if they heard someone knock on their door in the middle of the night. When the juniors probed further, they figured that it was a ghost of their deceased senior. Years before their admission, a senior of theirs had a fight with her boyfriend on the phone at midnight. Devastated, she wanted to talk to someone and began to knock on everyone's door, but since it was so late, no one answered her. She couldn't think straight and jumped off from the top floor. Ever since then, she will knock on everyone's door at the exact time of her passing. Upon hearing this, the girl was frightened and did not dare to sleep on her own. When night fell, she couldn't sleep and kept thinking about the story. The clock ticked and the time came. She heard distant knocking from one end of the corridor, starting from the first room. The knocks were being followed by a lady's voice. "Is anyone willing to talk to me?" The knocking and desperate begging grew stronger, and when it was almost the girl's room, she was really scared. So much so that she hid under her bed with a blanket. Then, it was her room. The knocks were soft. When the girl was anticipating a question, she heard, "I finally found someone to talk to." Upon hearing that, she passed out. After that, she learned that when the senior jumped, her head landed first. So, in her ghostly form, she was walking with her head on the floor and legs facing the sky. The junior girl made a mistake by hiding under the bed where her senior's ghost could see her through the door gap. This story was told to me by my uncle and aunt, who lived near Songchun Garden in Ipoh. And of course, the eerie things happened at their neighborhood. It happened a few years back. And back then, the locals were shocked with the news of a man getting shot multiple times in his own car when he was refilling petrol. Having a tarnished reputation as a member of a triad group and a loan shark, the locals thought it was enemies avenging for his evil deeds. The investigation didn't progress much, and its case is closed at present. The very car he died in was under both his nephew's and his own name. Therefore, after his death, his nephew had the right to claim the car for his own personal use. Coincidentally, his nephew stays right opposite of my uncle and aunt's house. Both of them and my cousins are dog lovers, so they had a few dogs. The night when the nephew drove the car home, which was at midnight, the dogs were disturbed by a presence, and all of them howled. Not only their dogs, but almost all dogs in the neighborhood. My aunt was alarmed, and she expressed her concern to her husband, telling him the unusual behavior of the dogs. However, my uncle brushed it off by telling her that it might be any female dog having a period, causing a high mating desire among the males. She was not sure about his reply, and went off to bed. The howling lasted until the wee hours, and they had trouble sleeping. The very next morning, my aunt went over to the opposite, and they talked about how peculiar the dog's behavior was. Soon she found out about the car and how the previous owner died from gunshots. She was terrified by the news and related the matter to my uncle. Basically nothing they could do. The next few nights, eerie things started to happen in the neighborhood. First, a teenage girl staying not far from the nephew's home was talking on her phone with her friend when she heard a coarse male voice interrupt their conversation. The voice was very harsh and sounded pitiful. She was so scared and quickly ended the conversation. Second, a lady was preparing dinner in the kitchen when she heard a man whispering and talking at the back lane of her house. She opened her back door and found no one. Third, a lady woke up in the middle of the night and heard a man sobbing pitifully outside of her house. She decided to peek from her window upstairs, and she saw a black figure sitting under a tree outside her house and crying. And lastly, continuous barking and howling of dogs towards the car. Soon the neighbors were complaining about the strange incidents and confronted the nephew's mother. She was concerned about the car too, and decided to persuade her son to take the car to a temple for blessing, which her son gladly did. After the blessing, strange incidents ended, and the dogs stopped howling. have an older cousin who has had the third eye ever since she was young. Lucky for us, she usually doesn't say anything in front of us if she sees something. But she has told us before, if she suddenly becomes very quiet or asked us to walk away, we must follow her instructions. My cousin used to stay in a very rural area in northern Johor, which is near Malacca, in a small village, about 20 households maximum, around 20 to 23 years ago. And I always visited her home when I was a young kid. There was a makeshift Indian shrine behind her home, near a small stream, and we always played there together with the other cousins whenever I visited them. There was this afternoon when it was about to rain at about 4 to 5 p.m, and we were playing near the shrine when she suddenly shouted at us, "Come back now!" And she ran towards us and pulled us away and brought us home. It was only a few months later, when we had a gathering, that she told us what had happened. She said she saw an Indian ghost that was trying to play with us. We were kids playing some kids' games. The ghost seemed like it wanted to join us and disturb us. The ghost didn't look friendly and had an evil intention. Then, suddenly, an Indian god that resembled the god at the makeshift shrine appeared and subdued the ghost. That was when she shouted at us to get home immediately. Another story was told to us by my mum's close friend. She was giving birth in a private hospital in the west of Singapore about 20 years ago. There's not many private hospitals in the west. After she gave birth that night and was resting in her bed, she was woken up by someone pulling her blanket and also pulling at her arm at around 4 a.m. The thing said,
"You are sleeping in my bed. Get out."
all along, she had been praying to Guan Yin and Erlang Shen. And suddenly, she saw Erlang Shen appear and took the ghost away. How true this story is, I have no idea. Just sharing what I've heard. But for this auntie, after a few years, she went to learn from a master who said she has the life to be in this line, and founded a home temple to help others ward away evil and pray for people. She's not a medium, and she mainly does praying, feng shui, and helping people set up altars at home. Nowadays, she is big time, because some of her clients made it from rags to riches. One time, she bought my parents a new Guan Yin statue. She even said, though all are statues, there are some statues which make you feel at ease and warmth when you look at them. If you see that one, that's the one you should bring home, and she will do the necessary open light. My late grandma used to stay in a big bungalow in Malaysia. I would visit her during my school holidays and spend 2 weeks with her. I would always sleep with her in her room during my stay. I started to experience and see strange things when I was around 15 years old. Incident 1. My late grandma's house was a 3-story bungalow. She slept on the 2nd level. As she was an early sleeper, she would go to bed around 9 p.m. I do not sleep that early and would watch TV in the living room on the 1st floor until about 11 p.m. This particular night at around 10 p.m, I was watching shows on TV, and suddenly I heard noises from the kitchen. The kitchen was about 200 meters away. I thought my grandma came down to drink water. However, the lights were not turned on, and I could only hear the sound of water gushing from the tap and the clinking sound when you put the cup back onto the tray. I again thought my grandma did not wish to turn on the lights and did not think too much. However, after 15 minutes, I heard noises again from the kitchen. I was a little puzzled and went to check it out. I turned on the lights and no one was there. The basin was dry, and it doesn't seem like anyone had entered the kitchen at all. Incident 2. I was watching TV again on the sofa, and this time round, I had my cousin beside me. While watching TV, I saw something coming down the staircase from level 2. It was a little boy. I couldn't see the face, as it was in dark shadow form. My cousin noticed me gazing at the staircase. She told me that they were here for some time, and they do not mean to harm. Right after she said that, I saw another 2 figures coming down and brought the child upstairs. I believed that the other 2 were the boy's father and mother. Incident 3. I was sleeping in my grandma's room and she complained that someone is pulling her leg in the middle of the night. I tried to see if there was anyone there, but just couldn't see anyone. Incident 4. It was the middle of the night, and I heard the room door open. Someone came in and went to the restroom. How I knew that she went into the restroom was that my grandma would leave the toilet room's light on. That someone came in and went into the restroom and closed the door. Then I heard water running, as if someone was showering. After about 5 minutes, that someone came out and left the room. So I was curious and went to the toilet and bathroom and checked it out. To my surprise, the basin and the floor were both dry. So who was showering in the bathroom? Georgetown in Penang, Malaysia, is a very old city. Most of the buildings downtown were built before World War II, and many, especially the school buildings, were often used to station Japanese soldiers. Many of these buildings were used as prisons and execution centers too. This school, commonly known as CIS, is an all-girls school. It is one of the oldest schools in Malaysia. It was used as a prison by the Japanese during the war. Inside one of the classrooms, there were carvings of British prisoners' names on the wall. The school also houses the first residence of Sir Francis Light, the founder of Penang. Although the school building has been declared a heritage site, some old buildings are of no value, and they were excluded from the heritage building list. One of such buildings was the canteen. Old canteen was declared unsafe, and hence was torn down, and a new school canteen with a badminton hall above it was subsequently built. The badminton hall has 2 entrances, one on each end of the hall. However, only the door on the left end of the hall is usually open. The other side has a locker cum changing room, and hence the exit was not open for privacy reasons. Before one gets into the locker room, one has to go through a door, and then there is a small passageway with a surau, small mosque, on the left. There is another door before one can get to the lockers and changing area. Then there is the staircase and another door which is usually locked, as mentioned above. Some years back I used to play badminton in that hall on weekends. Personally, I have not seen a ghost or heard anything out of the ordinary. My brother, who was there with me every weekend, once said he saw a man waving at him from one of the classrooms nearby. The school has many ghost stories, but most of them, like what my brother experienced, are merely sightings of a ghost, feeling of a presence, or hearing of voices. However, there is one particular sighting which is probably one of the scariest ghost sightings I've ever come across. This story is told to me by the canteen caretaker, who was also in charge of the badminton courts. It was also told to me by my friends who were once students in that school themselves. One morning, a group of students were having their regular physical exercise session in the badminton hall. At the end of the session, all the girls went to the locker room to change. All of them left together and went back to their classroom after that. About an hour later, one of the girls realized she had lost her purse. She thought she must have left it in the changing area in the hall. Hence, she decided to go back to the locker room to look for it. She got permission from the teacher and set off for the badminton hall. When she got there, there's no longer anybody there. Being a badminton hall with dark curtains, the hall seems pretty dark without lights on. She switched on the lights and walked straight to the other end of the hall where the locker room is. When she got to the door that leads to the small passageway, she found that the door was locked. Nobody could have locked the door unless there was someone inside. Since there was no more classes in the hall, obviously someone was having some hanky-panky business inside the locker room. Eager to get her purse back and curious to what her schoolmates might be up to behind that door, she peeped through the small window in the door. She couldn't see anyone, but suddenly, out of the changing area, she saw a figure floating in the small passageway. It was kind of transparent, but yet seemed solid. Then the girl noticed something she did not want to believe. The floating object became clearer and clearer, and she noticed that it was a headless woman. Being someone who doesn't believe in ghosts, she refused to believe what she saw and decided to take a closer look through the window again. Again, she saw the same figure. This time, it became clearer, and she could see a woman in a Malay costume, floating about half a meter above the ground, without a head. The girl got so frightened that she rushed out of the hall immediately. She ran to the canteen caretaker and told her what she just saw. The canteen caretaker said she dare not go up there and investigate, but she said she believed the girl's story, and she was crying and she was completely pale due to the shock. The teacher later called her parents to take her home. This happened a few years ago when I took up a part-time job as a waiter at Genting Highland. As a waiter, I needed to work in shifts, sometimes at day and sometimes at night. Back then, I was allocated a bed at Ria apartment with my cousin, who was working with me too. We shared a big room with other workers, so basically, it was a workers' hostel. Genting is an infamous haunted place in Malaysia where many people went there for gambling, lost a huge amount of money, and committed suicide. Many sightings had been reported throughout Genting, and therefore it is very important to pray to the deities at the temple in Genting, or get yourself a Buddha amulet for protection. The place I was staying, Ria apartment, is a very dirty place. There were cases where people saw children running in the corridors, children's laughter, and heard people playing mahjong. When I first moved into the apartment with my cousin, we noticed something particular. Almost each door was guarded by an amulet, the yellow one that we always see in Hong Kong ghost movies. We knew something was spooky at that very apartment we were going to stay, but did not mention anything. Anyhow, we believed that we would be left unharmed, for we did no wrong. We were merely staying temporarily. Our stay there was normal, nothing unusual, and we did not see anything eerie, although the room we were staying in was not guarded by an amulet. Both of us were wearing Buddha amulets for protection. I almost forgot about the lurking of the unseens until one morning. That morning, I had to check in at work at 8 a.m, so as usual I woke up at 6 and got myself ready for work. When I was ready, it was only 7 a.m, and I didn't want to go to work that early, so I sat on the floor, waiting the time to pass. My room door was wide open, and from where I sat I could see the washroom's door at the far end, and the kitchen entrance, which was just opposite my room. When I was daydreaming by looking at the lamps in the kitchen, my room was pitch black, everyone else was sleeping. There was a sudden movement on my left, and I saw a man in his 30s walking out of my room. At that moment, I thought it was only one of my roommates. I didn't see his face. His back was facing me, walking towards the kitchen. I thought to myself that he was going to the kitchen to brush his teeth. A moment later, I noticed that the toilet was empty and began thinking, why didn't he use the toilet? I kept looking at the kitchen entrance and expecting him to come out so I could say hello. I never did a formal introduction with others. After about 10 minutes, he had not come out, and I couldn't hear tap water running in the kitchen. Out of curiosity, I went to check on him in the kitchen, but to my surprise, he was not in the kitchen. There was another door in the kitchen which led to the outside, but it was locked from the inside, so there was no way he could have exited the kitchen via that door. Not to mention me staring at the kitchen entrance the whole time. I made my move to the toilet and still didn't find anyone. That instant, I knew I saw something. I couldn't explain his disappearance except that he is a ghost. I hurried to take my belongings and wore my shoes to work. I still remember how scary it was to wait for the lift alone afterwards. I was afraid that he might turn up and say hello to me. However, I was lucky because I didn't see him face to face. Or else, I might be running high fever the next day. To start, in my culture, we avoid saying ghosts, especially the particular ghosts' names. For example, in Western culture, there's banshee, woman in white, boogeyman, and stuff like that. In my culture, I'm Malaysian. We have ghosts like Pontianak, Pokong, Toyol, Lang Suir, among others. Saying their names out loud is said to summon them. I love ghost stories, but not the Western kind. I love Asian ghost stories, perhaps because that's what I grew up with. I find them spookier than Western ghosts. Due to the language barrier, there is not a lot of Malaysian ghost stories available in English, so 6 years ago, I started a YouTube channel where I read ghost stories that are mainly from Southeast Asia. I would record my voice, reading the stories at home, of course. I was living with another girl at the time. She also happened to be my colleague. We were working at a customer service call center that operates 24 hours, and our shift rotates weekly. Our 2-bedroom apartment was really small, so there was barely any privacy when it comes to noises. So I would usually only record when my roommate was out. I didn't want to bother her with my voice, and I would prefer not to have sounds from her going about her life in my recording. One time my roommate was working the overnight shift. She left around 8 o'clock in the evening, and I just got home from work 2 hours prior, so I decided to record my second video. About half an hour after my roommate left for work, I started recording in my bedroom. I think it was little more than halfway through the second story. I heard someone entering the apartment. This was weird since her shift should at least take about 8.5 hours. I thought if she came home early, it would be more than likely that she's not feeling well, so I went to check on her. When I went to look for her, she was nowhere to be found. The only logical explanation was the sound was from the next door unit, so I went back to recording. Not more than 15 minutes later, I heard the sound of a chair being pulled from under the dining table, and followed by running water in our shower room just seconds later. Confident I was home alone, I went to check. My bedroom door was facing directly to the shower room door. As soon as I opened my bedroom door, I had a clear view of the opened shower door, revealing a dark shower room. At this point, I was getting nervous. My thoughts were all over the place. I froze for a bit before I decided to look into the shower. The sound of the water running could still be heard. When I flicked the shower room light on, the shower was running, but there was no one in there. I turned off the shower and went looking for my roommate again. Maybe I missed her the first time, but still, I found nobody in the apartment. I was a little nervous, but was determined to continue recording. I wanted to be a YouTuber, and hoping one day I can quit my job and tell ghost stories full time. So I did. I finished recording the stories and went straight into editing. Around 1 a.m, I needed a toilet break. The toilet was separate from the shower and could only be accessed through the kitchen. After I had done my business, and while I was passing through the kitchen, I could hear a giggle from the living room. That stopped me in my tracks. I had a clear view of the well-lit living room. There was obviously no one there. At this point, I knew I was not alone. I ran into my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I hid under my covers, and that's when I heard something try to open my bedroom door. It went on for what felt like forever. I fell asleep and somehow I finished editing my story, posted it a few days later. Everything quietened down for a while, so I decided to record another story. This time I was recording during the daytime. It was my off day and my housemate was out shopping or something. Everything went smoothly, so smoothly that I was able to post the video by the time my housemate came home. That night we decided to watch a movie together. Before we started the movie, I went into the kitchen to make myself some snacks while my roommate picked a movie. Our TV is positioned on the same wall that divided the living room and my bedroom, and the sofa right across from it. So you can see the kitchen door and shower room door when sitting on the sofa. As I was coming out from the kitchen, I asked my roommate if she has found a movie. She was looking at me with a surprised look. "Didn't you just go into the shower room like 30 seconds ago?" she asked. I just shook my head and went to sit. The topic was dropped and we picked a Malaysian horror comedy movie. Mid-movie, our shower room door whipped open violently and we heard what sounded like a giggle. My roommate decided to sleep in my room that night. That was the last time we watched anything related to ghosts. Since then, I often hear furniture being moved, giggles and see shadows moving in my peripherals. But whenever I turn to look, there is nothing. Sometimes even when my roommate is home. She has also experienced some spooky stuff in the apartment, like her back being tapped by something while she was in the kitchen, hearing my voice calling her name when I was not home, and shadows running from the kitchen into the shower room while she was watching TV in the living room. I stayed there for a few more months until my roommate quit her job to move back to her hometown, and I decided to move in with another colleague. The new house was much larger. It was a 3-story house. I stopped recording ghost stories for a while after that. Even though I love ghost stories, I do not particularly like experiencing one. It took me about 8 or 9 months before I had the courage to record another one. It was not a very good idea. I will post that story soon. And if you're wondering why I'm sharing this story now, apparently, even after I stopped recording ghost stories, I still encounter supernatural activity. So I thought I may as well share it anyway. So this happened in 2019, but to fill in the gap, I moved from the old apartment to a new place sometime in December 2016. My life got busy, but I managed to record one video sometime in 2018, but I didn't really stick to it. I got married by the end of 2018 with a Canadian citizen, and we moved into our rental 3-bedroom low-cost flat on the other side of the city. Due to him not having any work visa while staying in Malaysia, he was mostly doing online studies and helping me around the house. After a while, he got depressed due to lack of progress in his personal career growth. So I came up with the idea, why don't we restart my Ghost Stories YouTube channel? But this time, he can help me edit and tell stories. He agreed and we started recording sometime in September 2019. The first video was recorded with ease. Nothing scary happened. It was all fine and dandy. However, we did avoid recording at night, especially after my husband found out the legend behind the theme song that I chose. The song is called Orginal. It is said that this song was a mantra that was used by witch doctors to repel or cleanse dark spirits. For easy understanding, I will refer to it as an exorcism from now on. According to the legends, the song came into existence after a witch doctor tried to save a fisherman who became unconscious after going on a fishing trip. It was said his soul was trapped in the jinn's world after 7 jinn princesses became fond of him. After a while, the exorcism ritual becomes more elaborate and includes dancing. With the time passing and the people of Peninsular Malaysia being introduced to religion, first Hinduism then Islam, and animism fades, the Unspoken becomes nothing more than just a folk song and dance routine. However, it is still rumoured to cause possession amongst dancers while performed. So it became less and less popular. But I thought it would be a good idea to use it as a theme song, and I somehow thought it would be okay if I sang it myself, cause it's not real. I admit, it was not a very smart move. However, things started to get weird during the recording of the second video. We did our recording session one story a day kind of thing because even though my husband was a stay-at-home husband, I still have a full-time job. During the recording of the last story, we ran a little late and ended up recording until close to dusk, around 7 p.m. Since our goal was to post every Friday, and that was a Friday evening, I talked my husband into editing the video that night. Since our video is just an audio video, and there is not that much to edit, it only took him less than 2 hours to get it all done and posted on the YouTube channel. The rest of our night went like normal, until it was time to go to bed. It was not even midnight, and we were laying on our bed trying to fall asleep. Then, we heard what sounded like chairs being dragged from upstairs. Soon after, we heard the same ticking sound, like when a handful of marbles hit the floor, also from upstairs. After this had been going on for about 5 minutes, reality hit me. We are the upstairs neighbour. Our apartment is only 5 stories high. Our unit is the top leftmost unit. My first guess was there's someone squatting on the roof, but then there's no simple or easy access to the roof at all. Since my husband didn't mention it, and I didn't want to freak him out, I just kept quiet about it. We went to bed, but we kept hearing the noises almost every night since then. One evening, we were watching some anime in our living room when suddenly an empty cup that was on our dining table just randomly fell onto the floor. We were both startled and got up to check it out. We tried to reason it as the wind knocking the cup off the table because it was a plastic cup, even though that doesn't make any sense. There is no window in our dining room. Our landlord is a contractor. Even though the outside of the flat looks pretty run down, the inside of our flat is pretty nice and was newly renovated just before we moved in. He even divided the wet kitchen and the dry kitchen with a classy looking glass wall and glass door. The other windows were kept closed as we run the AC. The same night I was woken up by my husband's half scream. When I got up, he looked like he was having a bad dream, so I woke him up. He told me that he saw an old woman with a scary face walking towards him from our door. We had our headboard on the wall opposite to the door, and our feet were pointed towards the bedroom door. He said he thought he woke up and saw the old woman approaching him, but he couldn't move, so he tried to scream. He insisted that I play some Islamic prayer until he fell back asleep. My husband is Caucasian. He was Christian until his family had a fallout with their church when he was in his early teens. So most of his life, he didn't really have a particular faith. So for him to ask me to play an Islamic prayer is serious. At least, that's how I feel. Because I am not religious and don't really talk about religion to him, let alone impose it on him. That's only the beginning of our scary life in that apartment. After the first time my husband had the night terror, we continued to record another video. The last video we recorded in Malaysia. Partly because we wanted to do it in hopes that it would turn into something we do full time, as we enjoyed telling ghost stories. We still do, that's why I'm writing this now. My husband was finally excited about something since the time he became a house husband, and it was a nice at-home activity for us, like spending quality time. While recording the third video, posted at the end of September 2019, we were careful to do it only during the day. However, it didn't save us or make the haunting in our home any better. In fact, the furniture dragging and marble dropping was becoming more often, up to the point that we could hear it every night. On top of that, my husband's night terrors also became more frequent. Playing Ayatul Kursi became our nightly routine, and when we forgot, my husband would have a night terror. It never stopped the sounds though. We kept hearing it. Apart from that, things were quiet for the rest of 2019. The most frightening thing happened in January of 2020, a couple of weeks before we left for Canada. My husband and I were packing our stuff, and we stayed up until much later than we usually did. We were using clothes that we were not planning to wear as wraps for our breakable items and putting them in the boxes in the living room. Our living room was well lit, and we usually left the balcony light off. This made the glass door to our balcony become more reflective, and we can barely see outside apart from the lights coming from the parking lot and the stairs light from the flat across from ours. We also had no drapes for our balcony door. The landlord didn't put up any curtain rod there for some reason. We didn't install our own because we didn't know how long we were going to stay there. We were waiting for the results of my PR application and were planning to move to Canada as soon as we got it. As we were packing, we heard what seemed like someone knocking on our balcony door with their long fingernails. We both instinctively turned our heads to the balcony and stared at it for a good 15 seconds. We saw nothing. And then we heard it again. There was still nothing. Our balcony was bare. There was nothing out there that could hit the glass door. My husband grabbed my arm and signaled me to get up, and we both went to our bedroom, and I played the Ayatul Kursi from my phone. After a couple of minutes, we could hear the nails on our bedroom window now. I decided to recite the Ayatul Kursi myself, with a louder voice. Midway through, our window rattled for 2 or 3 seconds, and the knocking and tapping sound disappeared, and we never did hear it again until we moved to Canada. The furniture dragging and marble dropping noise could still be heard every other night though. I am not sure if the next tenants who lived in that flat faced the same issues as us or not. I'm just hoping they didn't. After we moved to Canada, we stayed at my mother-in-law's apartment for a year. We recorded a couple of times during the pandemic out of boredom and hopes that we are in a new country and maybe it would be alright. It totally wasn't. Thanks for listening. This story happened in 2020 at 3 a.m. I was in the office at that time with my regular job at a BPO company in Ortigas. I'm a really big fan of paranormal stuff ever since I watched videos of paranormal investigations or actual ghost footage caught on camera. That Saturday morning at 3 a.m, I turned on my voice recorder and just left it recording for a couple of minutes. I'm just curious, what would my recorder pick up at that time, because the last time in 2018 I recorded a lady sounding like she's in pain, and many of my colleagues had their fair share of spooky moments in the office as well, and my hoodie got scratched by something when I was the only one left in the area. My recording lasted about 16 minutes, and when I reviewed it, there was the sound of a child that sounded like it was playing with someone, or something, at the 7:36 minute mark. And at the 7:41 mark, it sounded like someone snatched a toy from the kid, sounding like an angry child. Note, there were no children in the office at all.
I need to tell someone about what I saw that night. It is still terrifying for me whenever these memories enter my mind. It is perhaps the most traumatizing experience of my life, and I still can never forget this. Back around 2013, before I was going off to college, I was just at home, relaxing this night. My family was preparing to go out, but I decided I will not go with them, as I've had a hard week and I need a night to myself to relax. This was a weekend, I guess Saturday night, and I was left alone in our house. Our house is in Manila, very spacious. We have bathroom on the 3rd floor near the stairs, and a clear hallway on the 2nd floor with a huge window. I was just relaxing in the living room at this time, and I suddenly feel the urge to go to the bathroom, so I went to the 3rd floor. It was already dark now. I usually don't open all the lights to save the electricity. As I was about to go downstairs, however, I did open the lights, and I was shocked to the view that I had just seen on the hallway. This thing is all white, looking like a spider and a human figure at the same time. Both its hands and legs are on the floor, crawling backwards very fast. The hair, so long, following this figure dragging along. Its mouth, twisted back towards me, hanging open wide. My heart is pumping so fast because it was my first encounter to see this. The sight of this otherworldly entity, not just standing or walking around, but crawling backwards, contorted, disfigured. I scream at this time, and I run to lock my door. I kept on crying. I opened all the lights, and I messaged all of my friends to calm me down. I am still so scared, even after this night, because this is not the last time for me to see this awful girl. She haunts my life. It is rare for me to see her, but it comes so unexpectedly. This is why it is so scary. I never know what can I expect. The most frightening thing to me, however, is that it's only ever when I open my bedroom door that I see her. And every time I lay eyes on her, she has moved closer to my bedroom. I fear, to the bottom of my heart, that one day I am going to wake to see this thing, arched over my bed, its mouth wide open.
Many years back, Andrew Simmons, an English explorer, visited a small island of Cagayan, Sulu. It is a lonely spot of land in the Sulu Sea between the Philippine Islands and Malaysia. There are strange stories on the island related to a tribe of cannibals with cat's eyes called Berbalangs. When hunger for human flesh urges them, they will lie down in tall grass. They will then fall into a trance and go hunting for victims in their winged forms, while their bodies lie hidden behind tall grass. The people of Cagayan Sulu have been living in fear of these Berbalings for generations. They warned Andrew that the Berbalings made horrid moaning noises that are loud when they are far away, but grow fainter as they approach. When they are very close to you, the sound of wings flapping can be heard, and their eyes would move in the dark like fireflies. They told Andrew that a coconut pearl, an opal rarely found in the coconut, would keep him safe from the Berbalings. Without one, the only defense is a kris, a local traditional knife, with its blade rubbed with lemon juice. He tried to buy a coconut pearl, but found out later that it would only protect the one who discovered it. It would be powerless if given or sold. Andrew asked if anyone would come with him to see the tribe. Only one brave young man, Matali, volunteered. They started in the morning and finally reached the Berbalings settlement in the late afternoon. Matali refused to go any closer. We've seen it. Now let's go." "We're not stopping now." Andrew insisted that they go on further. "I'm not going in there. If you insist, you go alone." Matali smeared his kris with some lemon juice and handed it to the daring yet somewhat ignorant explorer. So Andrew went in alone. The place looked deserted. Only a few chickens and a goat remained. However, in one hut, Andrew saw some rice boiling in a pot, as if someone had just left it there. Andrew went back to Matali and told him what he discovered. Matali begged the Englishman to leave, saying that the Berbalangs were hunting in their other form. It would be a suicide to stay there any longer. As the sun was already setting, they finally made their journey home. Before they were even halfway back, it was already dark. Suddenly, there was a loud moaning noise. "The Berbalangs," Matali whispered in fear. "Pray they will pass without noticing us." They both hid behind the grass. The moaning grew fainter and fainter, which meant the Berbalangs were getting closer and closer to them. Soon, the sound of flapping wings could be heard. Matali and Andrew began to fear the worst when they saw fireflies flying over the tall grass. They halted for a second, as if they noticed something hidden in the grass, but then left. The moaning began to grow louder, and Matali sighed with relief. "They're gone," he said. "We're safe for now. Hurry, we must go." The two raced for Matali's village. As they ran beneath the tall grass, they could hear the moaning noises, which slowly and gradually grew fainter and fainter. At one point, Andrew saw an isolated house. "We must help the people inside," he told Matali. "The man who lives there, Hassan, has a coconut pearl," Matali said. "Now hurry, we have to escape." Andrew followed Matali, and they got back to their safe village after a short while. In the morning, Andrew laughed at himself for believing that story. He thought it was silly to let Matali's fear and some fireflies scare him. When he met Matali later that day, however, Andrew asked about Hassan. Matali said he lied about Hassan owning a coconut pearl. Hassan had arrived a week before Andrew on some research expedition to learn more about the island. Matali reckoned Hassan could probably be dead by now. Andrew, insisting that the story was mere superstition and was not true, decided to prove himself right by inviting Matali to go to Hassan's house with him. When the two of them got to Hassan's house, no one answered to their calls. They then realized the door was not locked, so they went in. They saw a desk with papers scattered everywhere on the floor. Matali went into the room while Andrew walked towards the desk to see what was there. Suddenly, he backed away and shouted for Matali. In the corner of the desk was Hassan, only his skeleton, with a few scraps of flesh clutching a shredded paper. Suddenly, they heard moaning noises outside, growing fainter and fainter and fainter.
This happened 1 year ago. Ever since this, I've been struggling to sleep. I felt like it is always watching me and my little sister, Mai. Our house, it was only recently built, and the surroundings were quite uncomfortable. Also, very eerie. I shared a room with Mai, but we slept in different beds. It was a double-decker bed near the window. We both decided that I will sleep on top while she will take the bottom. On that night, I was expecting a happy dream, but my expectations were shattered ever since I saw her. I was sleeping when I suddenly wake up for some reason. You know when you wake up in a panic, or you feel like you are falling and falling until your eyes will open. It was like that. I could see only a silhouette of a figure. At first, I couldn't tell if this is a man or a woman, or maybe just a light from the window. But it comes closer to me. It becomes more visible. It is bright white. I guess it took me a while to come out of dazed sleep, but I was creeped out when I remembered I am laying on my back, looking up at the ceiling, and that this person, this thing, was looking down, staring at me. Its lips were moving, as if she was mumbling something I could not hear. I tried to avert her gaze, but I could not move, not my eyes, nor my body. I have no choice but to look at this woman. At first I think she looks like Mother Mary, and that time I thought it was her. She was there beside me, her hands clasped together like she was praying. I was supposed to be relieved, but why do I feel so scared? My panting, it grows heavier and deeper. My hands were bare cold and sweating. The scary part of that night was when we both stare at each other's eyes, and then her eyes, it becomes red. I don't know what to do, but my eyes begin to tear up, and it felt like burning. Call it exaggerating, but that's really what happened. Then finally, in one blink, the woman disappears. That was the most grateful blink I've ever had in my life. I tried to sleep again, but I failed. I could only cry until morning came. Since that night, I make excuses so that I couldn't sleep on my bed, afraid that she comes back. Weeks passed. Mai confessed that she saw the same woman. I didn't utter a word as I listened to her story, which was the same as mine. I listened every single detail of the way she described the woman. It was the same. I finally asked if she saw her at my bed, and she nodded as she burst into tears. We tell our mother our problems, and she didn't believe it, but she separated our beds. Time passed, and that woman doesn't come back to us. A month ago, when I was sleeping together with my little sister, I suddenly woke up. I wanted to sleep, but I couldn't. Minutes later, Mai also wakes up, when, coincidentally, we hear a bang on the kitchen, and the door swings open. I cry, heavily, when I see that woman again. But this time, she was not colored brightly white. She was pitch dark, shadowy black. We were both feeling panicking as she comes closer to us. She was not walking. She was more like floating in the air. Mai held my arms as she shouted and cursed at her. Our grandparents and siblings woke up because of the noise we made. That woman disappeared when the light of the room turned on. We didn't tell them exactly what happened, because all we could do was cry, again. These days, me and Mai have been dreaming the same thing. Not some happy and nice dream, but a nightmare. In that nightmare, I could see that woman. Or we could see her. Is this coincidence? No way. It can't be. Why would she always appear to us? We do not even know her. But my gut tells me she wants something from us, and I do not know how long it will be before she comes to take it.
In March 18th, 1996, at around 4 p.m. local time, the nightclub, or as commonly referred to in the Philippines as disco, the Ozone Disco, caught fire. It happened in Quezon City, Manila. I had to mention the location to point out that it happened in a metropolitan area. Supposedly such matters could have been avoided or at least dealt with accordingly in a quick manner. You can just imagine it being in the nation's capital, where police and fire servicemen are within a call away, as opposed to it being in a rural area, where it would take quite a while for a response to reach their destination. Now, I was still in the Philippines when this happened. I was 11 years old, and am 24 now, and living abroad. This was a first in the Philippines, as it is said to be the worst club fire in the world. More than 160 people died, and about 92 others were injured. This incident shook the entire Metro Manila, and up to this day, families and friends and simply everyone who knew about this incident still have not coped with the sadness and grief of such a tragic event. As for those of you who are wondering how it happened, well, there are a large number of reasons, but I think the most popular and widely accepted fact was that the doors open inward rather than outward. If you ask anybody, they will tell you exactly that. When the fire broke out, nobody noticed. When the blaze grew, that is the only time people realized that there was a fire. The club being popular at the time, people would naturally flock to it. It became a symbol of social status, and this made it even more popular with the younger generation of the time. That being said, the place was packed, and when the blaze grew, people panicked and they all rushed the only door. See, there's another reason. Just one door and no fire exit. And just imagine, the door opens inward. Even if they tried, nobody could open the doors. Push? How? There was no room. The location of the fated Ozone Disco, or simply Ozone to most people, is now desolate up to the year of writing this, in 2009. Now, here is where my story begins. Soon after the incident, the sight of burnt corpses made headlines. May it be TV or newspaper, internet wasn't mainstream at that time. People would only find the horrible accident that occurred there. It had been the news of the year. People would talk about it, and could not come to accept how a sad and tragic event could happen. The Ozone Disco became a thing of interest, and as you may have already guessed, a great number of hauntings have been reported in the area. This happened a couple of years after the incident. Me and my friend were in a jeepney, public transportation, look it up, at around 9 p.m. on our way to our other friend's house. Our jeep passes by that route, and we would always look out the window at the now desolate place where the Ozone once stood. It was just me and my friend. The driver then told us, "You boys keep looking at that place, and you might find something that'll scare the wits out of you." I then turned to look, and sitting next to the driver was a man with his head turned at 180 degrees, looking right at me. I couldn't stop yelling curses. Luckily, the jeep had to slow down for an intersection, and I jumped out with my friend pacing after me. The place was filled with local bars, not discos, so there were lights, so I was a bit more relieved, but could not brush the horror out of my shaking self. My friend then asked me, "What's wrong?" I told him, "For Pete's sake, did you not see it?" He said, "See what?" I interjected, "The man in the jeep." My friend stopped looking at me with one eyebrow raised. He knew, I did too sorta, that it was just me, him and the driver in the jeep. Think that was the end of that? I really had to be a bother that night, and had to ask my friend to accompany me home, to which he kept questioning my manhood. Upon arriving home, I told him he could stay, but he's not one who believes in such supernatural things, so he refused and left. I was sitting on the couch or sofa, still feeling my heart go a mile a minute. My mum was still awake, chopping vegetables for tomorrow. My uncle, who was a taxi driver, came home. He went to get a drink from the fridge, and then sat down with me in the living room. We started chatting. As much as I hated to bring up anything about the ozone disco, unfortunately my uncle, said,
That disco sure is sad, isn't it?
I just said a quick and apathetic, yeah. He went on to say,
I mean, it somehow affects taxi business.
I said nothing.
I went by the ozone, but did not stop there. A few buildings from it, I picked up my last customers for the night before heading home. Then, an old man on a rusty old bicycle started to follow me. He seems too old to be able to catch up, but somehow, he does not want to stop following me. I tried to drive a little faster, but my passengers told me not to, as they were not in a hurry. To me, it sounded like easy cash. I can get a high fare just by going slow. The old man, still in view in my rearview mirror, is gaining on me. I came to a red light and had to stop.
Around 12 midnight, stoplights in the Philippines take longer to change.
The old man got off his bike and started walking towards us. He finally stood by my window and knocked 2 gentle knocks. I promptly, annoyed as I was, wound down the window and asked, There a problem? And he began to talk in a slow and crackly voice. I noticed you have been driving around the block. Are you lost? I told him no, my customers are joyriding. Said man scratched his chin for a second,
my uncle told me,
and he seemed satisfied enough. But I did notice your 2 passengers don't seem to have any heads, said the old man as he picked up his bike and went off.
My uncle stopped there and went home to get some sleep. Ozone is not of this world. I grew up in the Philippines, and I'm used to powerful typhoons crossing our country. While my hometown is rarely visited by typhoons due to its geographical location, watching the news about the aftermath of the typhoon was just a mundane scene. But on the 8th of November 2013, the entire country was reeling from what could have been the strongest typhoon of the century. Super Typhoon Yolanda, international name Haiyan, wreaked unimaginable havoc in central Philippines, Visayas region. Tacloban City, the regional city of Region 5, was the worst hit. The disaster claimed more than 10,000 lives, destroyed millions of dollars worth of crops and properties, and displaced millions of people. The locals are used to typhoons as the region is located at the eastern seaboard of the country. However, everyone got caught off guard by the storm surge. No one was aware about the imminent danger days before Haiyan struck the region. No one listened nor cared about the impending danger of the storm surge, which was reiterated a number of times by National Weather Bureau. Thousands of rotting corpses lay along the highway towards the airport, which is located at the peninsula part of the city, sandwiched by 2 bodies of water. Search and rescue operations were futile as well. The entire city reeked of death and despair. It felt like it was a scene straight out of a high-budget Hollywood disaster movie, only that this one happened in real life. Horrible was an understatement. On March 2nd, 2014, I moved to Tacloban City. It was my first facility assignment after I finished my training as an air traffic controller. First job, first facility assignment. I was feeling excited at that time, and all the terrible things I've read and heard about this city were briefly covered by excitement. The city during that time still had an unstable electricity connection, except for the airport. As day turns to night, the city is plunged into darkness, and it becomes eerily quiet. I stayed at the 3rd floor of the control tower since the staff house was totally damaged by the storm surge. On the 3rd night, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. As I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. At first, I thought it was our office assistant. We were 3 in the room at the time. The figure wasn't moving, and it felt like it was staring at me. The room was dimly lit, all thanks to the moon's illumination, but it was clear as day that the figure wasn't our office assistant. I just shrugged it off, thinking that my mind was playing tricks. The next day, I told my experience to my other roommate, my colleague, who also happened to have a strong sixth sense. She nonchalantly said, "We're 6 inside our room. The other 3 are just lost souls, probably typhoon victims. Just pray." The hair on my arms just rose. Weeks later, my colleague and I were the only ones inside the room. We were both on our laptops, doing our own business, when suddenly we smelled something. It was a sharp, distinct smell of an orchid. I got anxious and asked my colleague if she smelled something. From her body language, I could sense that she was really scared. She leaned on me and whispered, "She's right in front of you. Don't forget to pray for her. Eternal repose." I thought she was joking, but I was feeling cold at that time. I prayed hard that night. The following day, I asked one of the airport employees if he knew someone who loves orchids. "We have a former employee who used to plant orchids and other flowers in the control tower. She died during Yolanda," he said. The hauntings continued, but eventually I got used to it. I occasionally went to the city's cathedral and lit a candle for the eternal repose of the lost souls around the airport. Fast forward to the 7th of November 2014. On the eve of the Yolanda/Haiyan anniversary, I rode a jeepney from downtown to the airport. It was just one ride away, around 30 minutes with traffic. For those who don't know, a jeepney is a ubiquitous mode of transportation in the Philippines. Passengers would sit in front of each other, and the jeep usually has a capacity of 20 passengers, 10 on each side. I was at downtown doing some errands. By 6 p.m. it was getting dark, and I hailed a jeep that would take me straight to the airport. The airport is the last stop, so basically most passengers would alight before me. As we neared the airport, we were only 4 left inside the jeepney. I was seated near the driver, while the other 3 were seated at the middle part. As we neared the airport, the highway became dark. The streetlights weren't working, and there were only a few people walking along the streets. The 3 other passengers, 2 adults, male and female, and 1 male child, probably 7 to 8 years old, were dressed in an ordinary way, nothing spectacular to be honest. I assumed they were local fishermen along the area. Suddenly, the adult male shouted, "Lugar lang," which means that the driver should stop, since the family would alight the jeep in the next few seconds. I thought the driver didn't hear, maybe because of the loud roar of the jeep's engine, so I told him to stop. He did and asked me, "You going down, kid? I thought you were going to alight at the airport." I told him that the 3 passengers will alight here, not me. What he did next was truly terrifying. He started to speed up. The road was still dark, however, from the distance, I could already see the runway lights. We were near the airport. I could sense something was wrong. The other passengers were nowhere to be found, and I thought they went down when the jeep stopped momentarily minutes ago. The driver didn't utter a word. I began to break into a cold sweat. My heart began to pound. When we finally arrived at the airport, the facade of the terminal was brightly illuminated by LED lights. Finally, I saw his face. He was terrified. I gave him the fare, and he told me something that made my hair raise. He said, "You were completely alone, even before the dim part of the road." When he told me someone will alight, I sped up. I've heard stories from other drivers just like this one. "Did you see them?" I nodded nervously. "They might be one of the typhoon victims. Some say they aren't aware they're already dead. Please pray for their eternal repose." As I alight the jeep, I noticed that the seat where the other passengers sat a while ago was wet. It didn't rain that time. It seemed that someone spilled a bottle of water or something. And then it dawned on me. They were indeed the lost souls of the area. Remember that the entire city was inundated by a storm surge as tall as a 3-story building.